All right, welcome everybody to another live stream about origami tessellations. So today we're going to focus on one of the harder things in tessellations, which is reading crease patterns. And first, I want us to take a look at what is a crease pattern. So I'm going to bring up a crease pattern on the screen here, and we'll be taking a look at a variety of crease patterns and also at some of the structures that are used in them today. So this crease pattern, when we look at it, you might start seeing, okay, there's a lot of mountain folds, there's a lot of valley folds. And for context, for me, I always use red solid lines as mountain folds and blue dashed lines as valley folds. That way you can still tell which is which, even if you print it grayscale. But the thing that's going on here, we've got a bunch of lines on a background grid. And with origami tessellations, I want us to be able to distinguish between the bunch of lines, which we see straightforwardly, and what does that mean for the connections between things and the pieces that are being connected. So before we can see, like, what are these pieces that are being connected, we need to know what the pieces are. And so I'll take us through a couple different kinds of pieces. We'll start with pleat intersections. So these pleat intersections are some of the basic building blocks that are not twists. So like we saw in last week's video, we can take this basic pleat intersection of the three-way intersection on the triangle grid, and we can turn it into a bigger tessellation. So this is that same intersection here, labeled 1, that we have on the diagram over there. And I've joined it together with another one, so 1 and 2 together are the same as this structure down here if I rotate this way. So this could be considered as one block, or it could be considered as two three-way intersections. Now you'll notice if I have these same pleats, these same pairs of mountain and valley folds in the same orientations, but one spacing closer in the middle, then I can't do this intersection that I have with these two, because it's going to cause the paper to self-intersect, and that's no good. So if I want it closer together, I'm going to need to do a rabbit ear on the inside, and that's all this little triangle is. It's a rabbit ear fold, just like you're probably familiar with more normal or more figurative origami, I should say, where I'm just gonna pop this guy out as I'm folding it, and this would be on both sides for the tight version. And I'm really just going to focus on putting in those 3 new valley folds to get this rabbit ear. The rest of the folds will come out on their own. And I do want to be precise with my folding, but I can do it on the fly without pre-creasing as long as my grid is big enough and I'm confident in what I'm doing. So this particular fold will really lock this intersection into place, and then you can see on the back, if I wanted to scoot this closer, I would have space to, especially if I did another one over here, I would have a full spacing that I could come closer. So those are the common intersections on triangle grid. This one down here would be if I took one of these overlaps and I wanted to lay this tab down in the other direction with these edges in. And so with this, I get an option on the ordering of the layers with the left bottom pleat in the middle or on the bottom. So that's all that's going on with these four. Now you'll notice some similarities between these two and these top two. They're basically the same idea, just on square grid. And I'm going to use a 45-degree grid to demonstrate this. So I've already got the diagonals in here. And I'm going to bring up my 4 mountain folds. So these 4 mountain folds are going to be consistent for each of these 2 intersections. And what I'm really choosing here is a placement of valley folds. So for this left one, I'm choosing to place all of my valley folds in the top right and bottom left quadrants. And then I can go ahead and fold my intersection. Now this can be done on a standard square grid. You are going to need to pinch some new folds into place in the middle and then let this water bomb looking thing lay down in one direction or the other. This is the basis of simple tessellations like 5 and 4. And then the other option is, well, what if I want to have this kind of similar thing, but I want 2 of my valley folds down in this bottom right quadrant, keep the 2 away from the upper left. Well, I can just flip that in, and I'm letting this fold out instead of down so it doesn't run into the next bit over. So that's all that these are, and that's pretty straightforward. So moving on from these triangle grid and square grid pleat intersections, of which there aren't really that many, we can take a look at the 45-degree pleat intersections, of which there are many more. So these 45-degree pleat intersections, we've got kind of the same thing going on as we had with the triangle. The 3-way intersection, so we've got these 3 mountain folds coming together. On these first 3 options, we all have 3-way intersections, and we're just choosing different pleats to lay down. The difference here is that my choice of pleat, which one lays down not around rotationally, does make a difference for how the final thing looks if I'm using a 45-degree grid, because these 2 kinds of grid directions, so the diagonal and the horizontal or vertical, are different widths, and so you can tell them apart. So with the equilateral triangle grid, you couldn't tell them apart and we just had 1 intersection. Here we have 3 different ones depending on which one we're laying down in the non-rotational way. And then and so you can see 2 are rotating around counterclockwise, and then the 3rd is going clockwise. Here I have 2 rotating clockwise and the 3rd counter, but this time the odd one out is the diagonal. Here I have 2 going counterclockwise as before, and I call that right-handed. And you'll see more about that when I talk about the twists. And the 3rd is running counter. Now these other options out here involve a little bit more flipping things around, where I haven't just changed which side of the mountain the valley is going to be on, I actually switched the mountain and the valley directly. So these two, I just switched this mountain and valley. And that changed some things of how these interact in the middle. So here and here, likewise, I just changed which one was mountain and valley on that one pleat. And then we get into square twist stuff, and on the 45-degree grid, square twists are completely on grid, which is convenient because you can then change a pleat, change two pleats in two different ways. And so all of these down below are modifications of the top row pleat intersections. The first row is what if you mirror it along a diagonal. So this row, what if you mirror on a diagonal, with the exception of these guys out here, which I will slide off the screen. And then what if you mirror along the diagonal, but then space it out a bit more? And so those are these options. And then what if you mirror it vertically and horizontally and get it going around in a group of 4? So there's all kinds of options when you're looking at these 45-degree intersections. And to dive deeper into that, I advise you to check out my Tessellation Foundation series, where I have a whole video dedicated to odd divisions and 45-degree intersections. But moving on from those, let's go to twists. So twists are one of the really foundational things in tessellations. So when I talk about twists, I'm really talking about structures that are rotationally symmetric, made from a single sheet of paper. And so top of the line here, we've got a square twist. And you can see this particular square twist matches what is here on the diagram, because we can see if we're on this top left bit and we work our way over to the right, we cross the mountain first and then the valley. And that condition of curling around in this clockwise direction I call left-handed, because if you put your thumb up in the middle and curl your fingers around, in the crease pattern you will hit the mountain first and then the valley. In the folded form, you won't get your fingers stuck on a pleat. And so it's important to be able to recognize these structures, these twists, in both their left and right-handed forms, and also what they look like on the back of the paper. So when we have a left-handed twist like this, when we flip it over, it's still left-handed. Excuse me. Now that may be a bit unintuitive, because if we change the mountain valley assignments on all of the things, we would, excuse me again, we would kind of expect it to change rotation direction, but actually, because we both, so when we flip the paper over, we change all of the mountain valley assignments, and we also look at it from a different direction. So if we were to just change the mountain valley assignments, it would switch from left to right-handed. But since we're also turning the paper over, it remains left-handed. So then one other thing to notice with these closed twists, starting with this closed square, and I say closed because it is closed in the back. All the pleats are coming around a single point. The only difference between the left-handed and right-handed versions, so left-handed and right-handed versions, is the placement of the valley folds. All of the mountain folds stay the same, and if I want to switch from left-handed to right-handed, the only thing I need to do is change those valleys. So now I have a right-handed closed square twist. So let's continue looking at the different twists and which grids they can be used on. So next up, I've got a closed triangle twist. And you'll see in a bit why I have this triangle twist on a triangle whose edges are perpendicular to the pleat directions coming out. We'll go over that in a bit. This one is right-handed, so it's a match for this diagram. And if it was flipped over, it would be a match for this diagram. So continuing on, so now we know how to fold closed twists with 4 pleats and with 3 pleats. We'll next look at folding closed twists with 6 pleats. So we've got the closed hexagon. Now we're using all 6 directions of our grid, and still we're coming around a closed point on the back, and we are going in a right-handed direction. So when I go around this twist in the right-handed direction, I'm hitting a mountain, then the associated valley, then another mountain and its associated valley. And again, if I were to flip the paper over, it's still right-handed. So you can tell just by looking on the crease pattern of where the mountain and valley are. So that pair of mountain and valley, is that right-handed or is it left-handed, like these? And that can tell you, even if you're looking at the version of the hexagon twist on the back, whether you're needing to fold a right-handed or left-handed twist on the side that you're looking at it. So this is a key skill that we'll talk about more next week when I talk about how to fold a tessellation from a crease pattern, which is how to flip the paper over and still know where you're at and which direction you need to be twisting. So continuing again with these closed twists, the next one up that I have here is a rhombus twist. Now this is kind of sort of a closed twist because it's actually coming around a slit in the back instead of a single point. I call it a standard rhombus twist instead of necessarily closed or open, because you can see it as 2 closed triangle twists. So the top half and the bottom half kind of each make a closed triangle. Or you can see it as a third each of a structure that I haven't shown you yet, which is called an open hexagon twist. So as you might have suspected, and I'll show the back side of both of the right and left-handed versions as well. As you might have suspected, there are open twists as distinguished from closed twists. And we'll get to them in 1 second. First, I want to show the right triangle twist, which is the last of our closed twists that we'll be talking about today. So these right triangle twists, this one is right-handed. To align it with the diagram, it would be in this orientation. And the right triangle twist is the only of the closed triangle twists, of the properly closed triangle twists, where you can't just change the location of the valleys to change the direction of the twist. And that's because we do have this odd pleat out that has a deeper pleat than the other two directions, and that deeper pleat needs to be associated with that long edge, and specifically associated with that long edge in a way that gives a diagonal spacing and not any other spacing. And while we're on the topic of flipping things from right to left-handed, you'll notice that the rhombus twist does not keep all of the mountains in the same place when you change from left to right-handed. I can keep the inner mountains, which is more than I keep with the right triangle twist, but I don't keep the outer pleats. So when I change this twist to the other twist direction, I need to shift my mountain up here over to a different grid line before I can make that move. And now you'll notice that two of my pleats here stayed perpendicular to the edges of the paper and two of them did not. And so there's only one orientation of the rhombus twist, one twist direction and general orientation that matches this rhombus outline. And I'll show you why that's important in just a second. So then, continuing on with the open twists, here we've got the open square twist. And you'll notice with each of these open twists, we do not have the same mountain folds for left and right. We have different tiltings of the inner polygons, and we have different locations of the outer pleats. What you will notice, however, is that when I change from right-handed on the front to left-handed on the back, that can be performed strictly by changing the mountain valley assignment of the folds. The other thing to notice here is that if I zoom in here, I've got these little dashed, dotted red lines that are coming from the mountain fold of the pleat into the center. In the closed twist, these were all coming into a single point, but with the open twists, I'm coming around some space, some area. In this open square twist, that area is going to be one grid square. And that's exactly what will show up as an open space on the back. So precisely what is outlined on the front is what will show up as open on the back. So when we have a open triangle twist that is coming in around one grid triangle, we have one grid triangle open on the back. When we have an open hexagon twist, where the pleats are coming in around a hexagon in the front, we have an open hexagon in the back. Now, I don't have a demo here in front of me for this open rhombus twist, but this is something so you can see how any of these structures can be modified to be open. Even the right triangle twist can be modified to be open. And this is one of the things that I teach in tessellations by tiles and also advanced twist techniques. And so when we are outlining some hexagon or some triangle or some square, we can make a twist with that. Now, if we are outlining some random trapezoid, some random rhombus, some random other shape, good luck. It might work out, it might not. But these regular shapes, so the shapes with the same angles, same lengths of each side, are going to work out if you want to fold a twist around them. So that's enough about twists. Let's move on to how are we actually going to put these things together? So that's the pieces part. But what I want y'all to understand is there's positions and relationships between positions. So there's square positions, hexagon positions, triangle positions, rhombus positions, right triangle positions. And if you get into advanced stuff, there's also trapezoid and other positions. And then there are relationships between these positions. Like, is my hexagon surrounded by triangles on all sides with those triangles surrounded by hexagons? And those two pieces, so the positions and the relationships, get you the tiling, which is what we'll be talking about next. And then the crease pattern itself, like the actual mountain and valley assignments on paper, tell you more about the contents of the positions. So have I put in a open or closed triangle on the front or back of the paper into my triangle position? Have I put a open or closed square on the front or back of the paper into my square position? And that's the kind of thing that a crease pattern will tell you. But you need to be able to recognize what is a position and what is not in order to be able to say, okay, this position has this kind of twist in it. And then the other thing a crease pattern will tell you is the spacing. So how far apart is it between these two positions? Is everything as tight as possible? Or do we have some space in between our twists? So the tiling plus the fold lines of the crease pattern gets you to the full tessellation, which is why I've been emphasizing both these building blocks, these twists and pleat intersections, and also the tiling, because you really need both in order to recognize what's going on and how these pieces are fitting together. So let's jump to tilings. When we're looking at the tilings, what I want to look for is what shapes are there and how they're related to each other. So starting with the square tiling, I see squares and only squares. And you might be wondering at this point, why do I have them in different colors? Why do I have these shapes laid out so that each shape is one color and each of its neighbors, and I'm defining neighbors as edge adjacent, not corner adjacent, each of the neighbors are a different color than the square itself. And that's true for the triangles here, for the hexagons and triangles here, for the hexagons, triangles, and rhombi over here. Well, in order to go from one position to the next, I need to change twist direction. So if I have a pleat that is right-handed on one side of it, when you transition over to that next position, it's going to be left-handed on that other side. So the pleat itself is neither right nor left-handed, but it enables a right-handed twist on one side and a left-handed twist on the other. And so I was hinting earlier about why do I have these twists on the shape such that the edges of the shape are perpendicular to the pleat, and this is precisely why. So those twists I can just plug into one of these patterns, and the pleats will go straight across to the neighbor. So with the square tiling, when I see, okay, I've got my twist in here and it's going over to the neighbor of a different rotational symmetry, I can look at it either as this structure, and I can say, okay, I'm going to need to go from this twist to its neighbor, around to the next, back to the beginning, and that's going to be 4 things around this corner. Or I can use the structure that I call a skeleton, which has a dot in the middle of each twist, in the middle of each block of the tiling, and a bar connecting the twists that have a pleat between them. So with this, I can say, okay, starting from this dot, traveling along these lines, going around until I'm back to the beginning, and this is a loop of 4. And they are all loops of 4. Every single one of my squares has 4 neighbors, and each square is part of 4 loops of 4. Okay, so what are the symmetries involved here? What are the maximum symmetries possible here? Well, I have these blue lines as mirror symmetries on every boundary here. And those are more like, we can use mirror symmetries here, we don't have to, and we often choose not to. And then I have 2 different kinds of 4-fold rotational symmetry. So there's the right hand 4-fold rotational symmetry and the left hand 4-fold rotational symmetry. And then there's these 2-fold rotational symmetric positions in the middle of the loop of 4. And so anytime you have 4-fold rotational symmetry, you are also going to have a second 4-fold rotational symmetry and a 2-fold rotational symmetry. And that's just a property of the symmetry itself. As long as you have a repeating pattern, which with folding tessellations you probably do, if you have a 4-fold rotational symmetry, and I mean truly 4-fold in the infinite expansion of the tessellation, you are also going to get another 4-fold symmetry and a 2-fold symmetry, even if you're using the mirror lines. Okay, so that's squares on squares on squares, the square tiling. Let's take a look at triangles. So these equilateral triangles have 3 neighbors. Each of their neighbors are triangles. The neighbors also have 3 neighbors, and you need to go around through 6 of them before you get back to your starting triangle. So then the skeleton here says, okay, each triangle has 3 triangle neighbors, and you need to have 6 of them before you get back to the beginning. So what symmetries can we use with these triangle twists? Well, we can have 3-fold rotational symmetries. And we can have these 3-fold rotational symmetries in 3 distinct positions. We can have them in the right-handed triangle twist, and I do red for right-handed. We can have them in the left-handed triangle twist, and we can have them in the middle of the loop of 3, the loop of 6. You see these blue lines as well. That means this tiling has the potential for mirror symmetries. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see this more clearly. And basically, on any of these mirror symmetry lines, there's potential to change the spacing in the pattern, although that would interfere with the 3-fold rotation if you don't also do that on the other mirror symmetry lines as well. So there's a lot of flexibility here. And one of the things I want to emphasize is whenever you have two different threefold rotational symmetries, so like the right-handed and the left-handed triangles here, you're also going to have a third threefold rotational symmetry equidistant from the other two. So we've got another equilateral triangle in these positions between the three different threefold rotational symmetries. Okay, so let's take a look at the next option, where we've got hexagons and triangles, and there are 6 triangles around each hexagon. There are 3 hexagons around each triangle. So here, the skeleton is you need to go from a hexagon to a triangle to the next hexagon, back to another triangle to get back to the original hexagon. So we've got these loops of 4. And you might notice by now we had loops of 4, loops of 6, back to loops of 4. This is going to be the case where we always have even loops. We don't have loops of 2 because you need to go all the way around a corner. You can't just go and come back. But with, for example, the right triangle twist, you can get up to loops of 8. I haven't seen loops bigger than that on gridded tessellations, although you can certainly do bigger loops if you have irregular grids or completely custom tilings. And folding all of your crease lines individually instead of from the grid. For me personally, I really prefer folding from a grid because you can just get started as soon as the grid is done in most cases. So here we do have a 6-fold rotational symmetry where each pleat you look along from the hexagon looks the same. And you can see I've got the 6 in the middle of the hexagons. I've got 3-fold rotational symmetry in the middle of the triangles. And I also have 2-fold rotational symmetry in the middle of the loop of 4. So that's the second time that's shown up, that I have 2-fold rotational symmetry in the middle of a loop of 4, where the corners, the opposite corners of the loop of 4 have the same type, same twist direction, same symmetry. Zoom in a little on that, and you can see that these 3s and 2s are outlining a hexagon around the 6. And that's another common pattern. Wherever you have 6-fold rotational symmetry, you'll also have 3-fold and 2-fold symmetries. But what we've seen so far is that every twist has some kind of rotational symmetry inside it, and that's just not the case always. And we can apply each of these symmetry patterns to these standard tilings, the squares, the equilateral triangles, the hexagons, and triangle 6-fold. We can apply these patterns in different ways, but that's going beyond the scope of today's talk. So the last tiling that I'll show you today is a counter example to that. We've got the hexagon, triangle, rhombus, triangle tiling, and to show why I call it hexagon, triangle, rhombus, triangle, it's because of these loops that go from hexagon, triangle, rhombus, triangle, back to the hexagon. These loops of 4 are what, for me, define this tiling. So then, let's take a look at what we can do with this. Here's the first example that we have, where we don't just have one kind of loop. We've got these loops of 4 and also loops of 6, where we're alternating rhombus, triangle, rhombus, triangle, rhombus, triangle. So that's different. So now, if I'm looking at this, I'm trying to figure out, okay, it looks like I've got a 6-fold rotational symmetry in the hexagon. Where is that 3-fold rotational symmetry? And if you're watching the replay, I invite you to pause and look for this on your own, because this will be a vital skill in reading crease patterns. So those symmetries, the 3-fold symmetry is in the middle of the loop of 6, just like we saw a 3-fold rotational symmetry in the middle of the loop of 6 in the equilateral triangles case. And then the 2-fold rotational symmetry is in the middle of the rhombus, which makes sense because when we saw the rhombus twist, it's only 2-fold rotationally symmetric, and that's the most symmetry it can have. So here we have all of these triangle twists with no rotational symmetry in and of themselves. So here we have an interesting case where the triangle twists are not rotationally symmetric, and so we need to know that when we're folding, so we don't expect them to be in positions of rotational symmetry. So here only the hexagons and the rhombi are in positions of rotational symmetry. So knowing some of these tiling patterns can be really helpful when you're folding, and even when you're analyzing crease patterns, because it helps you predict, okay, what do I need to look for? So if I see a 4-fold rotational symmetry, I'm thinking immediately, okay, I need to look for another kind of 4-fold rotational symmetry and a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry. If I see a 6-fold rotational symmetry, I'm saying, okay, I need to find where is the 3-fold, where is the 2-fold. And these are going to be arranged in a hexagon around my 6-fold rotational symmetry. If I see a 3-fold rotational symmetry without a 6-fold rotational symmetry, I'm looking for, okay, where are the other 2 locations of 3-fold rotational symmetry? Now those other locations of 3-fold rotational symmetry, they might be at the intersection of mirror lines. They might be across a mirror line from your position of 3-fold rotational symmetry that you found first. And so these kinds of things where it's like, okay, can I have mirrors in this pattern? Can I have rotational symmetry in this pattern? What kinds of rotational symmetry would I expect from the kinds that I've seen already? These are the questions that I ask myself as I'm looking at crease patterns. So then let's come back to the crease patterns and see what we can see. So when I'm looking at this crease pattern now, I'm looking for, okay, do I have any positions of 4-fold rotational symmetry? And I do. I have one in this closed square twist on the front. I have one in this open square twist on the front. And now I can identify, I can say, okay, this is a closed square twist on the front. This is an open square twist on the front. There are pleats that go between them. And all of the neighbors of the closed square are open squares. All of the neighbors of the open squares are closed squares. So when we were looking at the square tiling, I said there were 2 4-folds and 1 2-fold. Where's the 2-fold? It's in the middle of the loop of 4. There's a 2-fold rotational symmetry sitting right where my mouse is here. And that's in this tessellation, in this particular tessellation, that particular piece of information is not as critical as saying, okay, I'm going to have closed squares and open squares, and the closed square is going to have all open neighbors. And then one last thing, So we found the positions, we found the relationships, we found the contents of the blocks. Now we need to see the spacing. And in this particular tessellation, when I'm looking around here, I'm seeing the same spacing everywhere. Everywhere I look, I'm seeing 2 grid spacings between the pleats in the middle of one twist and the pleats in the middle, the mountain folds outlining the square in the middle of one twist and the mountain folds outlining the square in the middle of the second twist. No matter which pair I look at, there's always 2 grid spacings. And so this is a structure that I like to call a tube pleat, because when we have that mountain, when we have our 2 spacings along that mountain fold, so let's say these 2 spacings are on this fold, then that gives me 2 spacings between my valleys. So 2 valleys here, 2 spacings apart, and then I've got mountains, 1 out to either side of that, and that's going to create this tube structure. So that's a good one to recognize either from the front or from the back. On the back, you'll see 2 mountains, 2 spaces apart, surrounded by valleys on either side. So here, the positions that are important are open square, closed square, 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 and then the contents are closed square, open square. The spacing is tube pleat apart, and the relationship between these twists is alternating. So I've got one kind of square, and then all its neighbors are another kind of square. And each of those neighbors has neighbors that are the first kind of square. So I've got squares, they're alternating. I've got closed and open on the same side of the paper, and they are tube pleat spacing apart. And that's what I need to recognize and fold this tessellation. So what would the skeleton look like on this tessellation? I've got just a fragment of it here, but you can see these dots and bars. Dots go in the center of the square twist, bars go along, so not strictly in the same direction as the pleat, but connecting 2 twists that are connected by a pleat. And so we'll see more of that coming up. So moving on to the next tessellation, I've got another example of square tiling tessellation that kind of breaks some of the rules that I was talking about. Okay, so what have we got here? This is my meandering squares pattern, and I've got a closed square twist on the front and an open square twist on the back. And so you can tell pretty easily whether it's closed or open front or back if you focus on the fold lines that are not on the grid. Those are the ones that are going to be outlining the inner polygon, the inner shape of the twist. And those folds are going to be either mountain or valley. If they're mountain, the twist is on the front. If they're valley, the twist is on the back. And then if they are strictly diagonal to the grid squares, it's a closed twist. If it's bigger than a closed twist, then it's an open twist. So I've got this block of these 4 twists, and within the block they're alternating. So I go closed, open, closed, open. I've got my alternation. And then when I zoom out, Well, what do I have in between these blocks? I have mirror symmetry lines. I've got a mirror line on all four sides of my block. So across these mirror lines, I've got a open twist going to open twist on the back, going to another open twist on the back. This is not alternating. Now, if it was all open twists on the back, then sure. But I've got these closed twists on the front here, so I can see right away, this is not alternating between two twist types. I've got this block of 4, and then I have mirror lines around it. Okay, so that's good there. That's our structure. Those are our positions. We've got a block of 4 squares, where within those 4 they're alternating, and then outside of that it's mirrored. And so I just need to define that block to define the whole thing. So if I zoom in on a single block, what I've got here is these mountain and valley folds alternating around the central little block of 4 grid squares. And if I maintain that, that is going to give me my spacing for the block as a whole. So just like with the previous tessellation, we were looking at what is the structure inside of a loop of 4, and we said, oh, it's a tube pleat. And by the way, it's a tube pleat in the other direction as well. Here we can say, okay, I don't care whether it's a tube or not. I'm just going to look at, are my folds coming around these particular grid squares? And that will get me where I need to go. So that's the structure and the positions and the relationships. And when I say relationships, that's kind of the same as saying structure. So I've got the positions. So there's A, B in the block. And then the relationship is they're mirrored outside of that. The contents is we've got a closed square in the front, open square in the back. So A is closed front, B is open back. And then the spacing is we've got this really tight spacing, and we can also say, okay, the distance between pleats here is 1 spacing, the distance between pleats over here is 3 spacings, so neither of them are tubes unless you count right in the middle, and then we're mirroring outside of the block. So that's a variant of the square tiling that includes mirror lines, not around every single block of the tiling. And let's take a look at the skeleton and see how that changes how the skeleton looks. So previously the skeleton was all squares. Now I've got these wonky 4-sided shapes. Some of them are parallelograms, some of them are trapezoids, some of them are rectangles, but they're all 4-sided shapes still. And that's all we need them to be to fit the skeleton of the square tiling. So from there, we'll move on from these square tiling tessellations and take a look at a triangle. I've got these all over the place here. So we're going to take a look at a tessellation with all equilateral triangle twists. So this one starts out similar to the last one. We've got 2 positions and they're alternating. So this kind of in between the last 2 that I was showing. We've got a closed triangle on the front. So closed triangle on the front. And a open triangle on the back. So that's our A and B. That is our positions. We've got an A position and a B position. And the relationship is they are alternating with each other. We don't have any mirror symmetry in here. And then the contents of that is closed front, open back. Then the spacing, we can look and see, okay, how close are these things together? Well, the spacing here, the way I'm going to read it is looking in at the twists. I'm going to say, okay, the tip of this open triangle is one spacing from the corner of the closed triangle. So if I were to fold this diagonal to the grid mountain fold, that's going to put this corner right in the middle over here. So it's going to swing over the mountain fold into the middle. Or I should probably say under the mountain fold, because it's going to be on the back. And from there I can say, okay, in my end folded tessellation, this point is going to be exactly at that central point on the back of my closed triangle twist. And if it's going to be at that central point, well then I know what my spacing needs to be. The other thing I can do is I can say, okay, I've got my closed triangle already folded, and I'm just going to peek in, open it up, peek in a little. And what I'm seeing as a mountain fold on the back, well, that was a valley on the front. And that valley on the front is precisely this valley right here. And so then I know that my open triangle corner needs to come right to the center point, because there's one spacing past that center point before I hit the actual corner of the closed triangle. So here we might not see the pleats as well, but they are there. I've got this valley fold, and I have a parallel mountain fold that are going between the same two twists. So that still counts as a pleat, even though I don't have any place where the mountain and valley are right across from each other. Still counts. And so the skeleton in this case, you can see the typical the equilateral triangles, 6-fold loops. So we've got these loops of 6, and you can see there's a position in the center of the loop that's the same in 3 directions. So I can go 3 directions. So pick a direction, and every 120 degrees I hit a closed triangle. Pick another direction, and every 120 degrees I hit an open triangle. Cool. So continuing on with a hexagons and triangles example. This time I've got a closed hexagon on the front, bordered by closed triangles on the front. So here we've got a hexagon position and a triangle position. All the hexagons are the same, all the triangles are the same. So I'm going to call that an alternating relationship. So the positions are hexagon position, triangle position. Relationship is alternating. The contents are, in the hexagon position we have closed front. In the triangle position we have closed front. And then the spacing, we see again here we've got these 2 spacings between the corners of the hexagon and the corners of the triangle. And that's going to give us our tube pleats once again. This is how tube pleats look in a triangle grid. So if we pull up the skeleton, it's going to show us these loops of 4 going hexagon, triangle, like so. And Every hexagon is in a 6-fold rotational position. Every triangle is in a 3-fold rotational position. Those 2-fold rotational positions are in the middle of the loops of 4. Great. So when we've understood the positions, the relationships, the contents, and the spacing, we can then move on to the next crease pattern. And I'm going to bring up the one that is on the cover of this video, the thumbnail, which is my dancing ribbons pattern. And this one may not look much like there's pleats going between certain things. Like we've got these kind of candy wrapper shapes. And what I want to encourage you to do is split these shapes apart in your mind into triangle, rhombus, triangle, instead of having it be a whole candy wrapper. So if we think of it as triangle, rhombus, triangle, I can see that there is a valley fold here. I'm not seeing a parallel mountain unless I consider how in the diagrams for the closed triangle twist, I had the extension of the mountain going into the twist itself. And so I functionally have an extension of the mountain fold side of the pleat that's going into the twist that is parallel to this valley fold. And so this is a triangle twist transitioning to a rhombus twist, transitioning to another triangle twist. So what's the other shape that we have here? We've got all of these candy wrapper shapes, and it looks like they're going 6 of them around something. Well, if it's 6 of them around something, it's probably around a hexagon. Now this hexagon might look less recognizable because it's on the back, but this is indeed a closed hexagon twist on the back. And so this particular one I can see is a right-handed closed hexagon, because when I take my right hand around, if I put my thumb in the middle of that hexagon, I put my fingers out along a mountain, curl my fingers, I hit the valley. And as I continue around, I hit the mountain and the associated valley with my right hand. So then I've got a right-handed closed hexagon twist on the back, and I've got then left-handed triangle twists and right-handed rhombus twists. Now the left and right-handed doesn't matter as much as long as you start the first one in the correct orientation, then the rest will flow with the pattern. So here I've got a hexagon, triangle, rhombus, triangle structure. I've got that 6-fold rotational symmetry in the middle of the hexagon. And I've got a 2-fold rotational symmetry in the middle of the rhombus, which leaves the 3-fold rotational symmetry for the middle of this loop of triangle, rhombus, triangle, rhombus, triangle, rhombus. Now, if I want to see these loops more clearly, I can draw the skeleton. And so the skeleton shows very clearly, okay, the triangle, rhombus, and triangle that form this candy wrapper shape are all distinct, and they're going to form a loop with through here. And sorry if y'all are picking up on more noise, the cat started meowing, lots of things going on. So that is how I read crease patterns. I'm really focused on, okay, what are the positions? What are the relationships between the positions? That tells me a lot about the tiling. And then what are the contents of those positions? What is the spacing between them? That tells me more about the particulars of the tessellation. So between these four factors, the positions, the relationships, the contents, and the spacing, you get your whole tessellation, and all of this can be read from the crease pattern. So if you want to learn more about folding from crease patterns instead of just analyzing them like we've been doing today, join me next week and I'll be teaching how to fold from crease patterns. And little hint, being able to analyze and see the skeleton of the crease pattern is going to be a large part of that because we're going to be folding twist by twist. So we need to know what is a twist, what is not a twist, what is a pleat intersection, which I would also fold like any other twist. So join me next week at the same time, and I will see you there. All right, happy folding, y'all. I know this was a long one, and I'll see you next week.